Hey, welcome back to our Journey with Jesus Bible study, where we're going through the Bible chronologically within a year using the Bible Recap Study Plan by Tara Lee Cobble. Today, I'm going to go through days 37, 38, and 39 all together because they're talking about the tabernacle and what God was telling Moses the tabernacle needed to be constructed with, how it needed to be constructed. And I'm not going to go through every single thing because y'all would probably stop watching about 2 seconds into it. But I did want to highlight some of the things that I learned from the God of Freedom study that I did with Jen Wilkin because it really is amazing. I will never claim to know the information on my own that I have learned. I highly suggest if you have time, go do her God of Deliverance study where it's chapters 1 through 18, the first half of Exodus, and then the God of Freedom, which is the latter part of Exodus. And it really is amazing. Before we move on to that, I did want to highlight something that I have not mentioned in my previous videos where I was talking about the Book of the Covenant. What we're talking about in the Book of the Covenant is the Mosaic Covenant, the covenant that God made with Moses and his people, the Israelites, to make them a holy priesthood. I'm going to read to you the commentary about what the Mosaic Covenant was from my Bible. It says, Israel was already God's chosen people because of the promises God made with Abraham. Like we know that the Abrahamic covenant. The covenant with Moses established the nation as a holy kingdom of priests. And I think we need to know that it's a kingdom, right? Kingdom means that there's royalty involved there and a kingdom of priests. So there's a holiness that's involved there. And so this is distinguishing them from any of the other, the surrounding nations that will be with them because they are dedicated to God. So Israel will be what is called a theocracy, a nation ruled directly by God. And that's different from any of the other ones because obviously they were polytheistic, where Israel is now monotheistic, meaning they only had one, not many. So I didn't mention anything about that in my previous videos, and I wanted to kind of highlight that so that y'all would kind of understand the significance of what that the Book of the Covenant was and what it meant. Okay, so chapter 25 begins with the contributions for the sanctuary. And keep in mind that the whole reason that they even have these supplies and the materials to make these things the Lord is commanding them is because they plundered the Egyptians, which the Lord told them to do. And in doing some of the study on this, the amount of gold, the amount of silver, bronze, and all these different materials that they would have had, even fabric. Fabric is heavy. I don't know if you've had a load of fabric before, but it is heavy. It would have been so heavy for all of these people to carry. Now, thinking about 600,000 men, just men having to carry all this stuff, makes a little more sense, like why there were so many. Obviously, this is not the only reason why, but thankfully there were 600,000 men plus, others who would have been carrying this stuff. But I was just kind of like, it's like, I think somebody did you can Google it and try to find out like the exact weights of everything. But I'm just kind of like, that is heavy. Okay, so in the beginning of chapter 25, we see the Lord telling Moses the contributions for the sanctuary, right? And so sanctuary means holy place. And tabernacle literally means dwelling place. And we see in John chapter 1 verse 14 where it was, that Jesus was the word. I'm paraphrasing here. Jesus was the word and it came to dwell with us. I think that's what it says. I tried to say it from memory, but I was kind of like, I do not want to misquote scripture. So it literally says, and the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so the more, like, Jesus is the Word, and he dwelled with us. And so it's very symbolic. Like the tabernacle is very symbolic of this being the manifest presence of God and him coming to dwell with us. But it's, the question is God is omnipresent, right? Like, why does he need a dwelling place? Well, he doesn't need a dwelling place. We need a dwelling place for him. And so we need a place where he can come and manifest his presence and dwell with them. He wanted to be a God that was with his people and wasn't just, barking orders at his people, or just like it's a different relationship. And that's what established the difference between them and the surrounding nations who had all these gods for different things and that kind of thing. A few things to note about the tabernacle: it had features of a house, like of a home. It had a seat, so the throne was a place for God to dwell. The mercy seat, that's the Ark of the Covenant, and under the mercy seat was the law, and several different things would be put into the Ark of the Covenant. And what's amazing about it is they all represent Jesus. So the law, the tablets will be in there. The Aaron's staff will be in there, and the manna, a jar of the manna would be in there. And what's amazing is the manna did not go bad, would not have gone bad. It went bad whenever they tried to get too much of it. But in the jar, because it was ordained by God, it didn't. And so the things that these were representative of Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Jesus is the bread that comes from heaven. And Jesus is our high priest. And so Aaron was their high priest, and it was his staff that was in the Ark of the Covenant. And so it's just amazing how detailed God is, and how when the Jewish people would have heard those things said about God, or about Jesus being the Word and dwelling and all these things, they would have recalled these stories, because it would have been like passed down to them. Like, that's why it's so important. I say this all the time, to know our Bible, because it just makes the Old Testament can be very hard to read sometimes. It can be very boring, but there are reasons that things are said the way that they are in the New Testament. And when you know the Old Testament, you see the significance and how it would have been heard on that audience of people. All right, and then we get specifics for the table of showbread. And so it's 12 loaves of bread, representative of each tribe, the 12 tribes. It was set with bread, but it was also set with wine. And so it's kind of a foreshadowing, in a sense, of the Lord's Supper. Everything points to Jesus if we really look at it. And the bread was eaten on the Sabbath. And so it was meant to show that God was our provider and sustainer, even during the Sabbath, especially during the Sabbath. If we go to the actual tabernacle is a call to the Garden of Eden. And so we know in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were sent out the east gate, and cherubim were put at the gate to guard them so they could not go in. And we know about the tree of life, we know about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but we see representation of that here if we look for it. So the golden lampstands, they are 7 branches of perfection. And we see that's kind of a pointing back to the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. And it was their sole source of light in the tabernacle. And obviously Jesus is our sole source of light in the darkness. And then the tree of knowledge of good and evil could have been represented by the law being in there, because the law is what lets us know what is good and what is evil. And so it's just amazing when you look at these different things of what you can see. And the closer you got into the tabernacle, the more precious things got, the more richer they got. So the outside of it was with I think it was the goat skin, and then it was like 4 different layers. You had the tanned ram skin, then you had the goat's hair, and then when you got in, it was more fine linen and fine things like the gold and the linen and the twine and all these different things were so much more precious the closer you get into it. And I feel like that's the more that we get to know God, the more we get to know him as our personal Lord and Savior, the more we're able to even dig into his word. Things become so much more rich the closer we get to him in our personal relationship. And so if we think about the tabernacle, we can think of it as in, it's got the gate around it, and just like God does, it's supposed to face east. Just like I mentioned that the Garden of Eden, it was the east gate that was barred off by the cherubim. Well, the outer court is to face east, the gate is. And really what the whole tabernacle and everything is to give us there's two different realities that are represented. The outer court is our earthly reality, where there's bloody sacrifices. There are like the loud cries from the animals and the smells. That one rotting flesh is probably not going to smell very good. Blood even has a stench to it, especially when it's been sitting there for a while. And these things are being burnt, and so burned flesh can't smell very good. Not to mention, when animals are scared, what do a lot of times? And so it would have been loud and just awful sounds and smells, but then you enter the holy place, and it's surrounded by these coverings of these all these different layers. And you have the incense, you have the light that is pleasant to the eyes, and just the smells I see it as that's Jesus, he's our covering. He's what keeps out. We can rest in him whenever life gets overwhelming and the smells are just overwhelming and we just can't take it anymore. We rest in him. And then the Holy of Holies, that's the only place that the high priest can only go there once. That's our heavenly reality. Like the inside of all of that is our heavenly reality, and the outside is the earthly reality. And I just love the intent and the picture of that. And to divide the holy place with the Holy of Holies, you had the veil. And this is what was torn when Jesus died. That veil that no one but the high priest could enter there. And even if he did enter there and he was not right and he was not consecrated rightly, he would have been dead immediately. And we see that there's going to be people that go into that room and they weren't, and they die. And so Jesus, nobody could enter that. And they had to do certain things in order to be able to enter. And that veil was torn by Jesus, and that's no longer a requirement for us. And knowing that in here, whenever you hear that the veil was torn, you can see the significance of that it wasn't just the high priest that can enter in there and be with God in his presence. Jesus tore that veil, and we get to be with him. And we don't have to worry about dying, as long as we have that blood, that his blood covers us and we are justified through him. Okay, and so we have two different kind of altars, right? We have the bronze altar, and then we have the altar of incense. Okay, the bronze altar is the altar that sacrifices were made off of. So you can imagine one, it was kind of nasty, and it was a bronze altar, and that's where the burnt offerings would have been burned on. And it stood in the outer court with the poles to move it, right? Like it would have rested. They had these poles where it would have rested, where they carried it. It was hollow wooden box that was overlaid with bronze. All right. And then, but it had 4 horns on both sides. And then we had the altar of incense. It was a wooden altar that was overlaid with pure gold. And it was so many feet high. It stood in the holy place before the veil, which separated the most holy place. And it was also transported on wooden poles. And it had 4 horns on it as well. So the significance of me mentioning this is the fact that they looked very similar. I kind of want to show that this is the bronze altar, and then this is the altar of incense that would have been in the holy place. The significance is the very fact they were very similar in design, but they were constructed of different materials. The one that would have been in the outer court where everybody got to go was made of bronze, and the one that was in the holy place was made of pure gold. And so the altar, the bronze altar was made of common materials, where the altar of incense, because it was in the holy place, was made of royal type materials. And then the smell that the bronze altar would have had, it would have smelled like death, right? Because it was significant for that. Well, the altar of incense would have had a pleasing smell, and that is how we are supposed to come to God. That's how we smell to God whenever we are if we live our life as a living sacrifice. That can be, it can smell awful down here, and it can, in our earthly reality, if we are a living sacrifice and it is hard and it hurts and sometimes it stinks and sometimes it just feels like death, if we are sacrificing ourselves for him, he smells nothing but those pleasant aromas, the altar of incense. That's what our sacrifices smell like to him. And that's where, as long as we love him and we are trying to live for him and we are allowing him to change us and sacrifice ourselves, he sees it as a pleasant aroma. All right, so we see more instruction on the priestly garments. So this is what the high priest would wear as he's going into, even Aaron's sons would have had specific things they needed to wear, but the high priest had special things that he needed to wear. I'm not going to go over everything, but I did want to highlight a couple things that stood out to me. So he would wear stones on his shoulders that represented every tribe. So he had to wear them on his shoulders. And then so it was, I think it was 6 here and 6 here. And that was to remember them, okay? Then he had stones for each tribe that was on his breastplate. The breastplate would have been held over his heart. And that was for every time that he would pray for them, that they were on his heart when he's praying for them. And they were all made of fine materials. Like, these were gemstones. And there's no way they could have had access to these types of materials had they not plundered Egypt. All right, so he would have had a turban on with holy to the Lord or holy to Yahweh on there. And he would have had on the hem of his robe would have been bells and pomegranates. And the bells were because if he did not, and we will see this, if he was not right going into the holy place, he would die immediately, and no one else would have known where he was. They had to be able to hear him because they couldn't see him. And so someone would have had to go in and rescue him or take him out if something were to happen. And so that's what the bells were for. And so that everybody would know exactly where he was. All right, and then in chapter 29, we see the consecration of the priests. So consecration means to make holy. And this is, they had to be washed, they had to be clothed, and then these 4 different offerings had to happen. In verse 14, it talks about, where's that? But the flesh of the bull and its skin and its dung you shall burn with fire outside the camp. It is a sin offering. Then we have a burnt offering in verse 18, and burn the whole ram on the altar. It is a burnt offering to the Lord. It is a pleasing aroma, a food offering to the Lord. Verse 26, we see a wave offering. You shall take the breast of the ram of Aaron's ordination and wave it as a wave offering before the Lord, and it shall be your portion. So this is what they can eat. Then there's a peace offering in verse 28. It shall be for Aaron and his sons as a perpetual due from the people of Israel, for it is a contribution. It shall be a contribution from the people of Israel, from their peace offerings, their contribution to the Lord. We see, and whenever they get into the promised land, the Levites don't get any land. They don't get anything. They are sustained by the rest of the tribes. That is their portion. And so there's a shared meal that is the peace offering, kind of like the Lord's Supper here. And so this is, like we've mentioned, this is God's dwelling place with them. And then in chapter 29, verse 45, it says, I will dwell among the people of Israel, and I will be their God. And they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. I've mentioned in previous videos that, he wanted to show Egypt that he was Yahweh, but now he wanted Israel. He wanted to be their God. He wanted them to love him and serve him, not out of duty, not out of servitude, but out of gratitude. So tomorrow we will get into in chapters 30 and 32, and we will talk more about the altar of incense, the bronze basin, and then the constructing of the tabernacle. Have a good day.